But thank you so much, Marco, and thank you for the opportunity. We are definitely in a stage now where we don't need to fully explain the bee problem, but maybe some of the implications of the bee problem. And I'm happy to share some of the things that we've been doing. So I'm Omer, the CEO and co-founder of BeeHero, a company originally from Israel. I'm based in California, so we are pretty much in between now. I think as we look at some of the companies that we just saw and so on, trying to address a more sustainable food system is probably one of our biggest challenges. And as we see the population growing and the need to make sure we can produce more efficient food, that becomes a critical aspect. One of the areas that many people are less familiar with, goes back to what Marco mentioned, is the fact that 75% of crops out there needs bees or insects to pollinate them. Without an insect going into the flower, you don't get any output. And if we go back 15 or 20 years ago, farmers didn't need to manage this input. It was given by nature. You had wild insects flying around pollinating flowers. But as we build a more intense and consolidated system, we need to introduce those pollinators to make sure this process happens. The problem is that the bees are dying. And that's a big aspect that affects food production. The fact that more than 40% of colonies collapse every single year does not only affect the honey industry. It affects the production of more than 70% of the crops out there. And we need to make sure that we establish a more sustainable way to utilize bees in the process of food production, but we can operate year over year in a way that makes sense. And that's exactly where BeeHero comes in. So we looked at the bee problem not as a beekeeper's problem, as a food production problem. And we decided to leverage technology in order to support beekeepers to introduce hives in a way that they can sustain food production and we can actually optimize the pollination process. We can make sure that every flower gets a chance. We found the company by the end of 2017, dealing in a slow adoption industry in the agricultural space. Luckily, one of the co-founders comes from the commercial beekeeping domain, which made it a little bit easier, to have the real conversation with some of the farms and some of the beekeepers early on. And we brought some strategic investors to support our efforts to introduce a new concept for pollination out there. And since the end of 2017, when we founded the company, we are today by far the largest pollination provider worldwide, mainly active in the US and in Australia, also from a seasonality perspective, but now expanding into more commodities, more geographies, making sure that the effort that we put in order to introduce better tools for beekeepers to bring better bees to the field in a sustainable way can be translated into better production of food in different geographies. So how does it work? We basically developed this tiny sensor. It's a low-cost unit that goes into an existing beehive. So you don't need to change the way that you operate bees, which is a tremendous driver in terms of adoption of new technologies. It sits on the middle frame of the colony. And we measure things like temperature, humidity, sound, and so on from inside the hive. And we can translate this data into insights. We can identify whenever the queen is endangered, whenever you have mites problem, viral disease, bacterial disease, exposure to chemicals, and so on. And that makes a big difference in the way that you can keep bees and maintain stronger and healthier colonies, and of course, reduce mortality rates, which is another very important aspect. And because we wanted to make sure that we can establish something that is pretty scalable, we said it's not just about supporting the beekeepers to introduce stronger hives. It's also about bringing the value all the way to the farms. We didn't want to depend on the beekeeper's ability to not only utilize the technology, but also explain to farmers why those hives are better, why those boxes in the field will visit more flowers during the pollination period. And we came with this concept of precision pollination as a service platform that allows farmers to engage directly with BeeHero and get the quality of pollination that they need, with full transparency, full access to the system to understand what's happening every single hive in their field during the pollination time frame. And in 4 years, we moved from a nice startup with a cool dream to a company that has tens of millions of dollars in revenues and trying to understand, what needs to happen now because it's a real thing. Some of the areas that I think we discovered having more than 300,000 hives monitored today is that there's much more we don't know about pollination than what we know about pollination. And we started to introduce in-field sensing technology because one challenge is to make sure you bring strong and healthy colonies to the field. The other challenge is to identify what is it actually doing. Is it pollinating the same area that needs to be pollinated? And we started to identify places of which female flowers and male flowers are not blooming at the same time. So you can get the best bees out there, get a lot of bee activity and flower visits, but get no pollination. You need to make sure you have this overlap between males and females. And that can also go to different varieties and so on. And we started to commercialize the concept of in-field sensing to support decision-making process of farmers in different commodities. We started to work with beekeepers because we identified areas of risk that they cannot monitor and track today. Hives are moving between 4 to 6 times a year from one place to another. In some geographies in Australia, it could be even 16 times a year. And you cannot, as a human being, you cannot identify the patterns of hives through certain cycles that are dying in higher rates. So we started to build a model with Rabobank, one of our stakeholders, to introduce new concept of financing and insurance solutions for commercial beekeepers to make sure that they can have the working capital needs in order to maintain strong and healthy colonies. And one of the areas that becomes very interesting is how can we leverage pollination data for new insights for different stakeholders. So over the last 7 years, we practically built by far the largest data set of bees and pollination. We are sitting today at around 25 million samples a day, which is quite overwhelming. And we work extremely hard with different data science teams in order to identify how we can best support our customers and other stakeholders in the industry, from improving yields, assessing yields, all the way up to ESG goals that you want to put for bee mortality rates and biodiversity aspect. And we leverage very granular level of information, measuring bee activity to the single bee level. This is not relevant for the commercial space, but definitely relevant for our ability to identify the correlation in terms of certain patterns. And what we've been doing over the last few years, and we'll probably need to spend additional 2 or 3 more years doing it, trying to leverage what we see inside those hives. Year-over-year comparison of pollination activity. In this case, you can see how we can leverage pollination data in order to predict almond prices. Now, it's 2 layers of information, and it's still not ready for commercialization, but practically we pollinate more than 10% of the almonds in the world. Pollination puts a threshold on productivity. You cannot have more almonds than flowers that were pollinated. And if you can build those comparative models of year-over-year comparing pollination activity, you can start and push those thresholds in a way that allows you on the second layer to identify pricing. So there's a little more work to do there, but I think we see that the more data we get from real-time pollination activity, it becomes more and more accurate, and I guess we have a lot more interesting things to do there. So happy to discuss later on some new opportunities, and thank you very much, Marco, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Omer.
Thank you.